Hello, my name is Kendra.
And I'm Hamish.
Today, May 19th, we are at the Cambridge Narrows Regional Library to interview David Henderson. Our hopes are that you enjoy listening to our interview. Today we are interviewing David Henderson in regards to the Hendry Lighthouse and the Gagetown Lighthouse. What can you tell me about the Hendry Lighthouse?
Well, the Gagetown Lighthouse was built in 1895. The Hendry Lighthouse was built in 1874. And they were aids to navigation for the really heavy river traffic that was in those days. You know, they were both on shore, so a lighthouse keeper wouldn't have been required to live right on them as you would see in a coastal lighthouse. But they were invaluable for people coming up and both coming up and going back down the river.
Were you around when the lighthouse was being used?
I don't remember ever seeing either one of those lighthouses in use. Now, I think they may have operated in my time, but I personally have never seen them actually on. It would probably be quite a thing to see, really. You know, and maybe some initiatives should be taken, if possible, to have them put on once in a while, maybe once a year. Cambridge Narrows being a bit of a tourist resort, it might be a bit of a draw if they were going to commemorate the lighthouse perhaps once a year. And that would be a little more incentive to have them kept up. It might even draw federal and or provincial funding to keep them up. It would certainly draw more awareness of not only the people that come from away, but the local people of the lighthouse and what the lighthouse has represented, if not today, certainly in the past, and in their parents, grandparents, great-grandparents' lifetimes.
Do you know why the lighthouse was shut down?
These lighthouses, as well as a lot of coastal lighthouses, would have been shut down because of other technologies coming in, and the lighthouses really not being needed anymore. And not to mention the fact that they saved the government a lot of money by shutting them down, but that's beside the point. But with the advent of buoys being put in, the buoys with lights, some with lights on them, some with bells, some with neither, but there's all these green and red buoys. But the lighthouses became redundant. They weren't necessary anymore. They just weren't needed. And that's why they disposed of all the river lighthouses, and the vast majority of the ones even on the Bay of Fundy. They found the opportunity to get rid of them.
Do you know of anybody who worked at the lighthouse?
Personally, I didn't know anyone that ever worked at them. Although their names are certainly on record, and you could find out more about them if need be. They were almost in every case a local farmer, perhaps someone that lived close to it, and quite close to the lighthouse. They would either walk or take their horse and buggy or whatever they had to the lighthouse to do the necessary maintenance, to perhaps light the light, to extinguish the light at the appropriate time. But it would be all local people. There was no one would actually live on the lighthouse property in these cases. And in the case of the lower Musquash, they would have to be somebody go to and from it by boat, usually from McDonald's Point. They put in at McDonald's Point Wharf and go out the island, which is a little more involved than, for instance, the Hendry or the Gagetown Light, where they could just actually walk to it if they lived close enough.
Who was the first lighthouse keeper?
At the Hendry Farm Lighthouse, interestingly enough, it was Joseph Hendry. I expect he lived in that house That's still there. I would would have been on his farm, or his grandfather's farm, or whatever. Anyways, it would be on the farm where he lived, and he would be the obvious choice for the lighthouse keeper. And at Gagetown, there's a gentleman by the name of Buzza, I believe that's how you pronounce it, B-U-Z-Z-A, and I really don't know anything about him. That's not a name that's not an old name in Gagetown, and I don't even think it persists today, so I don't know anything at all about him.
Do you know of any celebrations or accidents that occurred while the lighthouse was running?
The only accident that I've ever heard about, if you want to call it an accident, was that the Gagetown light actually floated away in the spring freshet once, and they had to go retrieve it, bring it back, and put it on its place. And as a result, they put it on it's now on a bit of a tower, so that the water can't get it at it so readily and wash it downstream. Celebrations, unfortunately, I know of no celebrations that ever happened. These things have been standing here, all three of these lights, for well over a century, and they've never been acknowledged. They were just treated as something that was there, and no one really cared about. Perhaps some initiative should be gotten up to celebrate their existence, to let people know, to inform both people that come here in the summer and also the local residents that these exist. These were a prominent part of the community in years past. Maybe new plaques put on them. Maybe have a lighthouse day in the community. Anything's possible. But they should. Their role in our past should be acknowledged in some way or another.
Is there any other information you would like to share in regards to the Hendry Lighthouse?
Well, perhaps simply the fact of why the lighthouse was there should be thought about. It seems a strange place for a lighthouse, but years back there was a lot more river traffic on the Washtenaw Lake than there is now. It was a lifeline. People were using the lake to get up there. The first settlers used the lake to get up there. They used the lake to go back to town after they built their farms. They used the lake to both get supplies and send produce to cities, to St. John. There is a reason that lighthouse is there, and that was to aid in the navigation of all this traffic. Wood boats went down here, and scores of them from the Washtenaw heading for St. John, and they had to be careful. They had quite a deep draft. They had to be careful where they went, and when they lined up the Musquash light with the Hendry light coming up the lake or going down, they knew it was safe. They had no problem, but without the Washtenaw Lake and the river traffic on it, these communities would have not been settled for probably a half a century after they were.
What do you know about the Gagetown Lighthouse? Well,
I've driven by it on numerous occasions. I know that it is, in fact, a navigation in the main St. John River itself, and can be seen from a long distance downriver, as well as when you come around the corner around Gagetown by the mouth of the Jemseg River. That lets the boaters know exactly where they are and where they should be going. There's a 90-degree turn in the river right there, and that's why it was placed there, to inform people. You've got to turn. It's just like a turn sign on you'll see on your highways today. There's an upcoming turn. Beware of it. Watch it. You have to turn before you get there. But it's right there on the ferry landing. It's a perfect place for a lighthouse because like I say, you can see both coming up and going down the river, as well as people that are actually going into Gagetown Creek to the village of Gagetown. They use it as well as through travelers.
Can you tell me about anyone that has ever worked at maintaining the lighthouse?
I know of no one personally, but it would have been all local people that would have had the job as lighthouse keeper. Probably someone on a neighboring farm would be picked if someone was available, because they'd be the handiest, and they'd be able to see the lighthouse all the time. If there was ever a problem with it, perhaps vandalism or anything, they would be the first to know. And these lighthouse keeper jobs would be good jobs. They were federal government part-time jobs, and they would have been a source of income, probably a plum. Probably everyone would want to crack at it, but I didn't personally know any of the lighthouse keepers.
What would they use to guide the ships around the sharp turn before the lighthouse was built?
The lighthouse was built in 1895. However, in 1869, because this 90-degree turn in the river, which was probably aptly named No Man's Friend, was so treacherous, they had a series of beacon lights, a total of 6 of them, put there to get people through, so they wouldn't recognize it. Like I say, the St. John River makes a 90-degree turn, and you don't normally see that on a river system, anything like that. So as a consequence, no doubt before 1869, there was a number of accidents that would have occurred at that place. But these beacon lights, they served until they actually built the lighthouse. And even after the lighthouse, the time that the lighthouse was washed away in the flood, from that time until they get it fixed and put back in place, they put a lantern in an elm tree. It was so critical that some sort of aid was placed there, that they for a period of time they actually had to use a lantern, which was hung from an elm tree.
Would you be able to tell us of any accidents that occurred before or after the lighthouse was guiding vessels?
I know of no accidents that actually occurred. However, it would seem obvious that if they went so far as to put out beacon lights, the 6 beacon lights on this, and named this stretch of river No Man's Friend, that there was either accidents occurred or perhaps a series of near misses, that somebody got after the government to put some aid of navigation there. It would have to be noted that starting, I believe it was in 1816, there was some passenger boats went up and down that river to Fredericton, and in order to avoid potential loss of life, they had to keep it as safe as possible. And no doubt it was these river captains who said, "Come on, you have to put something here. This is not safe." I would assume that is why that the beacon lights and subsequently the lighthouse would have to be in place.
Do you know of any people that may have helped build the lighthouse?
I don't know any names of people that would help to build the lighthouse. However, when the time come to build the lighthouse, a contract would have been awarded to a construction company. Probably, I would think, it would have been probably somebody from Fredericton, perhaps St. John. However, all the labor, materials, which would include lumber and any fill that was needed, and any kind of expertise, would have all been done by local people. It would have made a fair amount of work, government work for local people for a period of time. People would have, as today people have dump trucks, they just love to get on for road work. Back then they had a team of horses and a wagon. They just loved to use for the same purpose.
I've researched that people used to climb up the lighthouse and write their initials on the shingles. What are your thoughts about that?
That would happen definitely at the Gagetown Light, seeing as how it's right at the ferry landing, because let's face it, people would stop sometimes. They'd have to wait 3 or 4 trips to get on the boat, and they'd get bored and they'd go out around the lighthouse. Maybe they would climb up on it and carve their initials in. I can quite readily see that happening. When they replaced the shingles on the lighthouse, someone took some of the shingles away, and they still exist, complete with initials, on a barn in the neighborhood. They put some of the shingles on their barn, and they're still there today.
Were you ever on any ships while they were being guided by the lighthouse?
I've only had the privilege to be on a boat on the Washtenaw one time, and this was after the light was decommissioned. So we used the buoys for navigational aids. But I'm sure that, and maybe even the driver of the boat, maybe he was using for backup. He may have been using the two lights, the Musquash and the Hendry light, as a bit of a guide too, because he was a very careful, he was a very careful driver. We just kept between the buoys to the best of my knowledge, but no, I never. Coming up the lake, I don't even think anyone even looked at the Hendry light, looking off everywhere. It was something that was just there, just like a house, a big house. You wouldn't even look at it. It's always just there, and that's something that should really be addressed. That more attention should be drawn to this, because eventually it's going to be allowed to, if no one shows any interest, it's going to be allowed to go downhill, isn't it, and disappear.
People of our communities protested to keep the fair running. Do you think we could protest again to give the lighthouses more recognition?
Yes, I think you could protest and should. If not, protest might be a strong word, but something should be done, perhaps petitions put out, suggestions made. First you make suggestions to the ones in whoever is in power who would have the dealings with this, and suggest what you would like to see done with the lighthouse, and go from there. And if after an appropriate time they don't respond, then you pick up the tempo, and it might have to come to an actual protest in order to get people aware of it. In order so that people know you're gathering information about this lighthouse, these lighthouses now. This information could be used as leverage to get more recognition, because they should be preserved. They need to be preserved. They are an integral part of our history. They're part of the history of the Washtenaw Lake, and the Washtenaw Lake is Cambridge Narrows and the Washtenaw Lake are so entwined that it's really one entity. But the answer to your question is yes, you certainly can protest. However, the softer approach is used first, and then escalate to a protest afterwards. But recognition of this lighthouse, particularly the Hendry one, where it is so accessible, and it is in the village limits. This is one that should be emphasized, and council members should be approached. People of the provincial departments of tourism, culture, whatever. They should be approached, but you have to do your paperwork. You have to have suggestions of what you would like to see done, and that research has to be done before anything else. Perhaps you even go so far as to get petitions from local people and the huge number